Welcome back to another episode of Al-Shakal Awsatlana, Our Middle East. I'm joined by my dear friend and longtime colleague, Khaled Toameh. And today, Middle East moment, the drama, the threats, the opportunities, Gaza Stage 2, reality or mirage? Please join us. Khaled, we are finally in Stage 2, the last remaining hostage who had been killed by Hamas and held by Hamas, Ran Gavili, has been returned, and there are no more kidnapped victims, dead or alive, in Gaza. And now the real test begins, because there are a number of working assumptions that you and I have been chatting about for years that seem to be far less than realistic. The opening of Rafah on both sides, this is the one crossing that Israel does not have direct access to going in or going out, and it appears that that is a major concession to the Egyptian, Turkish, Qatari contingent of President Trump's Board of Peace. What do you think?
Well, Dan, we are on the threshold of Stage 2. We haven't yet moved to Stage 2. We haven't seen any real changes on the ground. As we are sitting here and speaking, today is Thursday. Rafah has still not been reopened. The technocratic government has still not arrived in Gaza, and there are many things that need to be finalized. However, let's assume that these things are going to happen in the next few days, and it's also possible that they will happen. First of all, when it comes to Rafah, Israel is saying that it will have some kind of a presence, a security presence, to make sure that Hamas does not use the border crossing again to smuggle in weapons, to smuggle in and out people. This is very crucial. It's very important. So the issue of Rafah is the border crossing is a big problem. And I'll tell you why. Because even if Israel has some kind of a presence over there, don't forget that the Palestinian Authority is also going to have some kind of a presence.
And so is Hamas.
Hamas will have a presence indirectly. The question is, will Qatar and Turkey also have a presence? In the past, we had Egyptians, we had others on the border, including the Palestinian Authority, and that did not prevent Hamas from using the border crossing to bring in weapons. So, we need to see what kind of mechanism will operate over there and whether this will be very effective and whether it will prevent Hamas from rearming, regrouping. So far, by the way, if you look at the situation on the ground, all indications are, and I talked to many people in Gaza, is that Hamas is rearming, regrouping, and it continues to control many of the institutions in Gaza. I'm not only talking about security institutions, I'm talking also about civilian institutions. So these are issues that we are waiting to see how they will be carried out. Then what role will the Palestinian technocratic government play? Okay, they're saying, we're there to oversee the reconstruction of Gaza and to manage the day-to-day affairs of the Palestinians. But what about the security issue? How can such a committee operate in Gaza when Hamas is the de facto ruler of Gaza, when Hamas holds the security? This committee will have to rely on Hamas to enforce law and order over there. Hamas has not agreed yet to disarm. I keep hearing almost every day from Hamas officials. Last night it was from Musa Abu Marzouk, a senior member of the Hamas political bureau, and he said the issue of weapons is non-negotiable. It has not been on the table. And if we are going to hand over our weapons, that has to be done through a national consensus among the Palestinian factions, which means Hamas wants to negotiate with Palestinian Islamic Jihad and the PFLP and probably with Qatar and Turkey about the future of its weapons. And all these parties are not very keen on seeing Hamas disarmed. Again, we have to wait and see. Look, this is, how it's going to develop, I don't think anyone knows, but it depends on how serious President Trump is. I mean, President Trump is the CEO of the Board of Peace. I mean, he's like
He's the Mukhtar.
yeah, he's the Mukhtar. He's the new leader of Gaza. And all eyes are on him now. And whatever decision he makes is going to be very important and will send a message to Hamas and to other Palestinians. And if I were President Trump, I would talk less and do more. All these threats, recurring threats, doesn't make it look as if it's a serious thing. I mean, you can't issue every Monday and Thursday a threat to Hamas and a new ultimatum, and they will stop taking you seriously. You either show them that you are very serious and that you mean what you say, or you stop with all these weekly threats, I call them.
It's really true. There's a lot of game playing going on here, but I can tell you one thing that's not a game, which President Trump has said clearly, and that is that Hamas will be disarmed. That he said it very clearly, and there will be demilitarized. Now, what's the rub? The rub is the only force, the only body that can do that is the Israel Defense Forces, and it's going to be very clear. The Gulf states are not doing it. The other international members of the Board of Peace, they're not going to be sending any soldiers. Only Turkey said that it would send, but that's a big problem because Israel will never accept Turkish soldiers disarming Hamas. That's the arsonist putting out the fire. And therefore, there are basically something like 95 days left, according to Jared Kushner's last statements on behalf of the president, until, if this technocratic government doesn't come into reach an agreement with Hamas. Israel is getting ready. By the way, Israel also today controls an additional 6% of Gaza. So Israel controls now about 58, 59%. The Hamas controls 41, 42%. So we're seeing this sort of squeeze play by Israel beyond the yellow line to where they're going to corner Hamas. But that's going to be the next real subway stop on this subway ride, if you will, in Gaza, is to see what's going to happen between Israel and Hamas, and that's going to take time.
Yes,
it's going to happen in a week.
I agree, but then when we talk about disarming Hamas, what do we really mean? What does that mean? Does it mean that Hamas voluntarily gives up all its weapons? Does it mean that Hamas agrees to give up some of its weapons? Or does it mean that someone goes into Gaza and forces Hamas to hand over its weapons? So far, I think we are talking about the first two options. And that's why President Trump keeps issuing threats. He's hoping that Hamas would voluntarily disarm, and this is not going to happen. What might happen, by the way, is that Hamas may hand over some weapons as part of a facade, as part of a show to appease the Americans and to make it look as if, there is some kind of disarmament. And stop telling me that Hamas cannot be disarmed and that they are born with rifles in their hands. And no, they not only need to be disarmed, Hamas has to cease to exist both as a military and a civilian and a political party also. There is no room for Hamas in the Palestinian arena. This is what President Trump should make very clear, he and the Board of Peace. But if you're negotiating with Hamas about when are you going to disarm and whether we might incorporate you into a new Palestinian police force, and if you accept a two-state solution or coexistence, we will give you amnesty. Why are you negotiating with Hamas about the future of Gaza after Hamas did what it did, after Hamas brought death and destruction on its own people and on Israel? You need to be very firm, very clear that after October 7, Hamas has no right to exist. We're not only talking about removing Hamas's military and terror infrastructure. Hamas needs to be removed from the hearts and minds of the Palestinian people. This requires a deep and thorough process of de-radicalization, as I mentioned, and I keep mentioning it almost every day. This is the only way to move forward. This is not about an AK-47 or a pistol. You need to
change
destroy,
the culture. You've got to change the culture.
You need to extract the jihad mentality and ideology from the hearts and minds of people. They don't need weapons to attack Israel. They can attack Israel with a knife, with an axe. And if they don't have them, they will kill a Jew with their bare hands. And that's what jihad is about. This is a jihad. The jihad does not need an AK-47. The jihad is something spiritual. It's inside you. This is what motivates you. This is what drives you. And that's what Westerners and probably President Trump don't understand. You can take all their weapons, but how do you take the jihad out of their hearts and minds? This is the real question that needs to be asked.
It needs to be asked and needs to be answered. And by the way, we should mention that that you're playing a key role in what the JCFA is called the Jihad Alert, which is exactly this type of de-radicalization initiative of exposing jihad in all of its forms, in raising and not only exposing but countering. Together with some of our other colleagues at JCFA, because as you said so rightly, so correctly, this is the disconnect between the West and the Arab East. They do not understand, or they haven't expressed a deep understanding for Islamist warfare and jihad. That's why they think that if you can just open the Rafah crossing, make Egypt feel good, send in humanitarian aid, allow what they call the decommissioning of weapons, while there are probably 60 or 70,000 weapons inside Gaza. And so if they give up 20 or 30, they think 30,000, they think they've made all this tactical stuff to make President Trump and his team feel very good. At the end of the day, this is jihad, the long war. It never ends until there's victory, until there's or shahada, or sacrifice on the altar of death.
You know, Dan, unlike many people, I've always taken Hamas and the jihadis very seriously. And I always believe them when they say, this is a jihad, we want to liberate all of the land, we will not stop, we will not hand over our weapons until there is a Palestinian state, we will not hand over our weapons as long as the occupation exists. In other words, as long as Israel is there. Why don't we want to take them seriously? Why do we keep trying to, interpret their words and say maybe they don't really mean it and it's just empty rhetoric? No, they do mean it. That's why we need to pay attention to what they're saying. I've been following Hamas almost from day one, since they were established. And these people have always been very committed to their ideology. They have been very consistent, very clear about their intentions. And when they say, this is a jihad, we want to liberate the land, we want to carry out the armed resistance, they do it. And we have seen over the past 36, 37 years a jihad against Israel. Once it was rockets, then it's missiles, then it's suicide bombings, then it's drive-by shootings, then it's stabbings, and finally it's October 7. And if you ask Hamas about October 7, they say this is just another phase in the jihad. And going back to your point, Dan, you mentioned something, or you hinted at it, and it's very important. Westerners, or many Westerners that I know, they don't understand that this is not about improving the living conditions of people. It's not about, building fancy hotels and great restaurants and for the Palestinians, or even providing jobs. Okay, this has a short-term moderating effect on people, but in the long term, it does not make Palestinians, more moderate or more pragmatic in their approach towards Israel. The only thing that changes the hearts and minds of people is education, not money. And education starts at home, the real education. And it's become a cultural problem. There's a very serious problem among the Palestinians. I believe that there's an entire generation, or probably two, that has been raised on the glorification of suicide bombers and jihad and death to Israel and death to America. And these are the beliefs and the ideas that need to be removed from the hearts and minds of people. It will take probably another generation or two to do this, but we haven't even started yet. And this requires brave leaders. Only brave Palestinian leaders who can stand up and say, enough is enough. This is bad for us, not because of Israel. We need to stop poisoning the hearts and minds of our young people. It's bad for us, the Palestinians, before it's bad for Israel. Otherwise, you will just get another generation of jihadis. And you can pour all the money on Gaza. It's not going to change anything.
You're absolutely right, Khaled. And this is where it brings me to a question. I'm wondering to what extent what you're saying is aspirational or realistic. Who is that leader on the Palestinian side? We've never seen a leader like that, anyone close to that. I can say one thing. Hani al-Hassan, who was one of the founders of Fatah and was, involved in terrorist acts. In the end of his life, I got to know him a little bit. And we had a number of discussions in Jerusalem, and he said, I've changed my view completely from what they call armed resistance to the issue of economic mutual interest. What they called the economic, he didn't use the word resistance, but he called it, economic interest. That's where he said, and that means to build up the future of the young generation and education. And and Hani was very serious in the end of his life, in his 81, 82 years. And I'm wondering, is there someone else that you can identify that really that has that? I think it's more of a Western view for the vision for the Palestinian leadership and their people, whether in Judea and Samaria, the West Bank, or whether in Gaza. Is it realistic?
I do find here and there some people like that, Dan, both in Ramallah and in Gaza, but these people are afraid to speak out. And I can understand them. I mean, if you're living under the Palestinian Authority or under Hamas, you would think 10 times before you speak out. There's also this fear of facing a backlash from the Palestinian street or the Arab street, especially on social media. Look, today, if you go to social media and you dare to say something that is in their eyes politically incorrect, or if you dare to criticize, the incitement among the Palestinians and the indoctrination, then you will have within 1 hour 20,000 people condemning you as a Zionist agent, as a traitor, as someone who does not represent the Palestinians, and you will be shamed and you'll be intimidated, and that's something that many people are afraid of. But there are very, good people. Some of them are in America, some of them are in Europe. I wish they would come back and play some kind of a positive role. But in the meantime, I don't see an alternative to Hamas and the Palestinian Authority. We are stuck with these two powers. Hamas is bad, but who said the Palestinian Authority is any better? They're both bad in different ways. And that's why Palestinians need to erupt against bad leadership. I have been saying for many years that one of the biggest tragedies of the Palestinians has always been bad leadership, failed leadership, corrupt leadership, leadership that never offers them real hope, leadership that deprives them of international aid, leadership that drags them from one disaster to another, leadership that radicalizes them on a daily basis as a means of distraction from corruption and other problems at home. And this is a very serious problem. What the Palestinians need is a Palestinian spring. And I said this many years ago, but we don't want...
Like the Arab Spring, if
Not
you will.
well. Okay, that started off well, but it was quickly hijacked by Muslim Brotherhood. Palestinians need regime change. They need to embark on a process of soul searching. They need to, distance themselves from all these negative, radical, extremist views. They need to look at the world and see that things are changing. I mean, this victimhood perception, or we need to get rid of it. Enough of it. You need to assume responsibility. You need to say, I'm here now to change things. I want to start working on the hearts and minds of the people. Then we can talk about the economy, but we need drastic changes, both in Gaza and in the West Bank. Otherwise, you're not going to move forward.
In fact, we heard just today that our friends at Palestinian Media Watch, Itamar Marcus, issued a report that the State Department is weighing, sanctioning the Palestinian Authority on a continuing pay to slay, continuing to remunerate young men and women to murder Israelis. And you really wonder, even though Mahmoud Abbas denies it and says they're not doing that, but I noted this morning on Israeli media that it's a question of musical chairs, because at one time it was a budget item in the Palestinian Authority budget. Now it's moved to the PLO, and
Yeah, it's like paying it through a different system. I mean,
right.
it hasn't really changed. Look, Mahmoud Abbas is walking a tightrope. On the one hand, if he cancels it, he will face backlash from the Palestinian public. And they will say, where's the money? Give us the money. You're corrupt. You're stealing the money. Or you are succumbing to U.S. and Israeli pressure. Now, if he doesn't do it, he's under pressure from the Americans and Israel and other parties. He's in a very difficult situation. I don't know what's going to happen with this issue, but the situation under the Palestinian Authority does not look good anyway. While the Trump administration is talking about reforms, we hear more and more stories of corruption, nepotism, embezzlement, and these stories are popping up, in the last few weeks and few months. I don't know if it's part of a orchestrated campaign or something, but there is something wrong over there. We haven't even talked about the political situation, the issue of succession, what's going to happen, the day after Abbas is gone, Abu Mazen. Will Hussein al-Sheikh take over? I mean, you do see behind the scenes some kind of a power struggle between senior Fatah officials. Many of them are unhappy with Abbas's decision to appoint Hussein al-Sheikh as the deputy president. So let's keep our eyes open and watch what's going to happen over there. At the end of the day, I'm very worried because if the Palestinian Authority collapses, we could end up with anarchy and lawlessness. The Palestinian Authority has many security forces, multiple security forces. Who's going to be in charge of them? And will these security forces, become militias? There are many questions that I can't find answers to.
This does not bode well for stage two, because stage two of the Trump 20-point plan is predicated on the entrance of former Palestinian Authority, current Palestinian Authority security and political types that are supposed to co-opt the Hamas. We know that's not going to happen. The Hamas are going to have to vet every single PA person that comes in. And then the joint strategy is going to be to drive a wedge between Israel, who now sits, but Netanyahu now sits on the board of peace, between him, Trump, and all of the others. So we're going to see, in my assessment, a lot of political warfare going on that will not allow this plan to move forward. And in fact, that's, I think, certainly what the PA and Hamas both want, is that they get money, they get international recognition, which is exactly Arafat's plan, Mahmoud Abbas's plan for the last 50 years, and not move anywhere and then blame Israel for it.
Absolutely. I mean, look, both Hamas and the Palestinian Authority, they know that billions of dollars are going to come into Gaza. And they will both make a big effort to lay their hands on it in one way or another. Hamas has agreed to allow the technocratic government to be in Gaza, but Hamas will have a shadow government. They're going to be there. They will supervise it. They will monitor it. They will be in charge. And they will use the technocratic government, as a tool for embezzlement and for stealing a lot of the international aid and redirecting it to other purposes. The Palestinian Authority, on the other hand, is also waiting. They know that a lot of money is coming in, and the Palestinian Authority, they want to be part of it. They know there's a big cake over there. They want part of it. They know that they hear all these plans by Kushner and others to rebuild Gaza and Riviera and I don't know what. And they see money. They don't see the interests of their people. They see money. They see dollars. And for them, this is very important. That's why this could all lead to a renewal of the a rivalry between Hamas and the Fatah or the Palestinian Authority. It could even lead to another civil war, as we have seen over the past 18 years between these two parties. So let's keep an eye open and watch what's going to happen.
I think we've been in this movie before. We've seen the Saudis in past years try to help the Hamas and Fatah or the PA-Fatah reconcile. We've seen the civil war during the Oslo years between Fatah and Hamas at the same time, Arafat very skillfully. mobilized both of them to work against the Israelis and denied taking responsibility for certain terror attacks. And I see something similar in terms of this blueprint happening in Gaza, but together with when you have the Qataris and you have the Turks, you don't have the Western, you don't have the Europeans, but you have all of these other countries as witnesses, and all of a sudden this can become one big bloody mess.
Yeah, so that's why I said earlier this week that the Gaza Strip is not a real estate company that can be run by a CEO, a board of executives, or a committee of technocrats and apolitical figures. It doesn't work like that. The change has to come from bottom up. You can't bring all these international players into Gaza and dump them there and say, let's fix Gaza. It doesn't work like that. I would have preferred to see Palestinians revolt against Hamas. I want to see Palestinians kick Hamas out, and that's not happening.
But you know why it's not happening? You made this point on this program because the people are not confident that there is a sheriff in town.
Yeah.
Right, to have
There's a vacuum. There's a vacuum.
Yeah.
And they also don't feel that the international community is very serious about getting rid of Hamas. I mean, they see the international community negotiating with Hamas about the future of Gaza. So people are very careful about what they say, what they do, and they're waiting. You will see people rise against Hamas only when they know that there's a very strong will and plan to destroy Hamas and get rid of Hamas. And that's something that is not happening in the meantime.
So this is really, I think, a discussion that has to be spread and shared with decision makers too, because at the same time, Jared Kushner, a very capable and skilled young man, has made a 3D representation of what he calls the new Gaza should look like, which is a multi-billion-dollar city of the future. At the same time, there's a disconnect here, because if in fact the only serious societal change can come from the bottom up, you've got to have 2 million Gazans that buy into the new Gaza, and for them, this is a complete culture clash.
This reminds me, Dan, of all the talk in the aftermath of the Israeli disengagement from Gaza in 2005. If you remember, there was all this talk by Israelis, by Palestinians, and by other actors. Let's turn Gaza into the Singapore of the Middle East. We will invite the Gulf states to build homes. Let's turn it into the Hong Kong, and things will be great, and the beaches will be developed. And what happened in Gaza? We all know what happened in Gaza. So as you correctly said, you need Palestinians to be on board. And if you want that to happen, you need to get rid of all these extremist elements, all these terror groups that are operating in Gaza. We're not only talking about Hamas, by the way. There are 5 or 6 or 7 other groups operating there. It will take a long time before you start talking about all these grandiose projects. You need to clean the area. You need to make sure there are no terrorists over there. Investors are not going to come into Gaza when they see masked men shooting people on the streets, and when they see that, there's no real government over there, and when they see that jihadis are in control. It doesn't work like that.
Absolutely. And Khaled, what worries me is that the creation of the Board of Peace, the executive, the technocratic government, and the executive, the International Stabilization Force as part of that. There are 5 different bodies. It looks like an American public real estate company in diplomatic clothing. And the problem is it raises expectations. The whole world now expects that this new Gaza structure is going to begin to bear fruit when we're in the same jihadistic Gaza that we were before, but with expectations raised. And ultimately, that ends up working against the realism that Israel faces in its security sense and its requirement to defend itself, because then Israel becomes recognized as the blockage to peace, as the not only the obstacle to peace is what I'm trying to say here. Why? Because it takes a very realist point of view in defending its own country next door, and therefore the wide gap between the expectation that is being created by this Board of Peace and this vision for the future and what actually is realistically happening on the ground in the context of jihad creates an explosion itself.
Yeah, the higher the expectations, the greater the
disappointment.
disappointment. And that's why we need to be very careful. I mean, you publish all these plans and you give people the impression that Gaza will be the new paradise of the Middle East and life is going to look different and will be. You need to be very careful, because if you raise expectations and people are on the ground do not see anything changing, and they're not going to see immediate changes, by the way, because of the jihadis who are still on the ground, this will backfire. And let me remind you, Dan, that in 2020, I think, or 2021, Trump published the deal of the century, and it also included economic incentives to the Palestinians.
Yeah, up to the third. Was it almost $40 billion?
Yeah, dozens of billions of dollars, and that plan was immediately rejected by the Palestinians. They didn't even want to look at it. They did not want to study it. Why? Because they said this is a plot, a conspiracy by Trump to liquidate the Palestinian issue. I already hear from many Palestinians and many Arabs that they're very skeptical. They're actually opposed to the Board of Peace and the Trump plan, but they don't want to say it openly. Right now, in private, they call it the colonization plan. They call it the failed plan. They call it the dream plan. But they're going with it. They're allowing it to happen because they don't. As you mentioned earlier about Israel, they don't want to be seen as the party obstructing peace efforts and stability. We need to remember, at the end of the day, Hamas's main strategy right now is to remain in power, to make sure that it will continue to rule Gaza in the post-war Gaza. And that's why there was a very important statement this week by a very senior Hamas official. Many people did not pay attention to it, by El-Hindi. I think his name was Khaled El-Hindi, or Suhail El-Hindi, sorry. And he said on El Arabiya, the Saudi national station, he said, what we are seeing right now is a long-term truce, period. In other words, Hamas sees what is happening right now as a repetition of previous ceasefires that were signed between Israel and Gaza. It's a ceasefire that Hamas wants in order to rearm, regroup, and consolidate its power in Gaza. This is exactly what is happening as we are sitting and speaking over here.
Well, I think that that's the exclamation point on our discussion today, is caveat emptor, as they say. May the buyer beware of what is being sold in Gaza. A very healthy warning, one that is culturally, contextually cultural. And this is exactly what we're trying to accomplish on Al-Shaq al-Awsat Lana. Our Middle East is to reveal the real, authentic Middle East to the West. And yet, I think, and here we have another, I think, very positive discussion, caution, and on the one hand, always remaining somewhat optimistic, but realistic. And I think that's
realistic is the key word, Dan.
Realistic is the key word, Dan and Khaled. And thank you all. Thank you, Khaled, and thank our wonderful audience for joining us again. Let's be realistic.
Thank you.